Hi, I'm Janelle. This is Janelle Knows Money. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to break down the similarities and differences between an HSA and an FSA. We're also going to talk about how much money, or how you could determine how much money you should be putting in an HSA or an FSA, or whether putting money into one of these accounts makes sense for you at all. So before we get into it, the first thing I just want to get out of the way is clearing up some of these abbreviations, right? What does HSA mean? An HSA is a health savings account, whereas an FSA is a flexible savings account. So how is an FSA and an HSA similar? So both plans are tax advantage medical savings accounts that the IRS sets a maximum for on an annual basis. They also both allow you to transfer a portion of your income into either this FSA or HSA account. This can kind of mirror what a 401k looks like, where you elect a portion of your base to then push into a specific account. So within the same breath, I compared this to a 401k. It is not similar to a 401k in that an HSA and an FSA, you can only use the money that you put in those accounts for eligible medical expenses. For example, this can include, co-pays. It could include just the cost of a doctor's appointment. It could be the cost of your therapy appointment. It could also mean prescriptions. Sometimes even HSAs and FSAs, depending on what their eligibility list looks like, means that you can buy Advil, you can buy tampons, different things that just are very common at a pharmacy. You can request a list of eligible medical expenses from your employer and or from the company that is hosting your HSA or your FSA account. They should have a list of around 50 things for each one of those accounts, where it specifically outlines what you can use the money on your HSA or an FSA for. So now that we have some of those similarities out of the way, there are a lot of differences, or a lot of things that make both an HSA and an FSA unique that we need to talk about. Although the plans as a whole kind of mirror each other, there are a lot of tiny little intricacies that we need to know about to better understand why these plans are very different from each other, while simultaneously having a very similar purpose. So what makes an HSA unique? The first thing that you need to know about an HSA is that you can only enroll in an HSA, or a health savings account, whatever you want to call it, if you are enrolled in a high-deductible health plan, which can also be abbreviated as HDHP. In an HDHP, your deductible is higher. So what that means is that you're going to pretty much pay for everything out of pocket until you hit that deductible, and then from there your co-insurance will kick in and your insurance plan will pick up additional costs for you until you then hit the out-of-pocket maximum. The benefit of enrolling in an HDHP is that your monthly premiums are typically lower, which makes the plan a lot more affordable as long as you don't have too many monthly or annual medical expenses that are coming up. We will talk more about HDHPs in another video where we compare high deductible health plans to PPOs and HMOs, so be on the lookout for that. So back to the HSA. The thing to know about an HDHP is that deductibles are very high, so that means that employees are not going to hit their annual deductible on an annual basis. It just makes it really hard to hit. For example, for like an employee-only plan, a deductible could be as high as a couple $1,000s. And when you don't have regular medical expenses that you have to take into account, it does get harder to hit this deductible, which is why having an HSA associated with your high deductible health plan is incredibly helpful and will help you better manage the costs of any known medical expenses that you have on an annual basis. So even though an HSA and an FSA have IRS maximums set on the accounts on an annual basis, what those annual maximums are very different. And the reason for this is with a high deductible health plan, they try to make sure that the HSA associated with that high deductible health plan, they try to make sure that the IRS maximum for that will allow you to cover, most of what that deductible might be. So, in case something does happen and you need to pay for those medical expenses until you hit that deductible where your co-insurance kicks in, then you have money in an account to help you do that. Another benefit of having an HSA is typically employers will help contribute money to your HSA plan. In order to get this benefit, all you typically have to do is sign up and register for an HSA. Sometimes you don't even need to contribute your own funds to it, and an employer will just fund HSA money to your account on a monthly, a quarterly, or maybe even just an annual basis that you can use and is your money to keep for any eligible medical expenses. Other companies you might want to, look into and see whether or not, you might even have to contribute $1 a month in order to get the employer contribution. But that's something you should talk about with your HR team. Note that how much an employer is contributing to your HSA will depend on whether you are in an employee-only tier versus employee plus children plus spouse or plus family plan. Typically, an employer will give you more money if you're in a, I guess, quote, higher level plan with additional dependents to help cover some of the cost of your dependents as well. And as a quick note, the reason employers do this is because they want to push employees into a high deductible health plan that is associated with the HSA. They do this because having employees on an HDHP and an HSA is cheaper for them. You're paying less in monthly premiums, which means they're also paying less in monthly premiums. So on a monthly basis, they're also not paying as much. And until you hit that deductible, an employer isn't contributing as much money to that plan. So that's the reason that they'll put money into your HSA account, is because even adding that additional money into your HSA is still a cost savings for them as compared to you enrolling in a different medical plan and having, say an FSA instead of the HSA. Okay, so besides the monthly premiums being lower, another benefit of having an HSA is that you can invest the funds that you put into your HSA account. So this again kind of brings up and gives us more 401k vibes, but it isn't exactly that, but it's similar in a sense. So some companies will set certain types of limits on your HSA. Say you need to have $3,000 in your HSA in order to start investing. But once you hit that threshold, you can start investing the money in your HSA into the stock market, which means you can get additional gains on that money within that account that you can then spend on medical expenses in the future. Additionally, compared to an FSA, an HSA does not have a use it or lose it policy. Once you put money into your HSA account, it is yours. Once an employer puts that money into your HSA, it's yours. If you leave the company, you go to another company, you take that money with you. It is yours until you spend it and or you cash it out, which, will probably have a penalty, just something to note. But it is completely your money. There is no way that the employer is going to take that back from you. So it really is a great additional way to save for medical expenses in the future. Note that you can typically update your HSA contributions at any point during the year. So if anything that I'm talking about sounds interesting and great, and you're like, oh my goodness, I have an HSA, I want to make that update, you can typically go and update mid-year. And the reason for that is that an HSA is funded, or the money in your HSA is funded to that account on a per paycheck basis. So if you're contributing $100 per paycheck, it's coming out of your paycheck and the employer is pushing it into the HSA fund on a per paycheck basis. It's a little bit different with an FSA, which we'll talk about later. So some would argue that the biggest benefit of having an HSA is that it has a triple tax advantage. So there are 3 components that you need to think of when you're thinking of this triple tax advantage, right? So the first is that when you are funding money to your HSA, it's coming out of your paycheck on a pre-tax basis, which is lowering your overall taxable income, which means on a per paycheck basis, you're paying less taxes on your income because your income's lowered because you're putting that money on a pre-tax basis into the HSA account. The second point is that you can withdraw money from your HSA on a pre-tax basis as long as it's for those eligible medical expenses. AKA, you pay for medical expenses on a tax-free basis. So these first 2 seem intuitive. So then the third one is, the biggest one of them all. When you have enough money in your account to invest your funds, and it's something you choose to do, the cash in there that is invested is growing tax deferred, meaning you do not pay taxes on the growth until you withdraw the money. And if you withdraw the money during retirement at age 65 or older, you can also then withdraw it on a tax-free basis. So what people are doing here is they're getting a high deductible plan. They're paying for all of their medical expenses out of pocket. They're using then the HSA as an additional kind of, retirement fund that they can withdraw the money when they're 65 or older, and they don't have to use that money for medical expenses at that point. And their money was able to be taken out of their paycheck on a pre-tax basis. It grows on a pre-tax basis, and then you can withdraw it on a pre-tax basis. Okay, now that we talked about the tax advantages, the last thing that I just want you to keep in mind that is if you have an HSA and you want to use the funds within it, make sure that you keep your receipts so that you can file a claim for reimbursement. And typically you will put the receipt into the system, say, this is how much I paid for this is how much money I would like out of my HSA, and they'll just put it right into your direct deposit account account, which is incredibly convenient and really, really easy. Now let's talk about what makes an FSA unique. So the first thing that I want to cover is that there are two different types of FSAs. You have a healthcare FSA and you have a dependent care FSA. In this video, we're specifically going to be talking about a healthcare FSA, not so much the dependent care one, just because the healthcare FSA more so mirrors what is going on with a health savings account or an HSA. So different than an HSA where you have to be in an HDHP in order to enroll in the plan. With an FSA, you have to be enrolled in a PPO or an HMO to be enrolled in this plan. If you have a high deductible plan, you cannot be enrolled in FSA in most circumstances, and vice versa. If you have a PPO or an HMO, you cannot be enrolled in an HSA. Also, unlike an HSA, an FSA you can only enroll in when you're a new hire within, the first 30 days of being a new hire or during open enrollment. During this time, you'll tell your employer how much money you would like funded to your FSA. And typically you'll do this, if you're hired mid-year, you'll say for the rest of the year, I'd like this much money in my FSA, or during open enrollment, you'll say this is how much money I would like for the next year put into my FSA for the whole annual basis. So then the money that is in your account will be present on the first day of your eligibility date, which is incredible. However, with an FSA, they have a use it or lose it policy. So this means that the money that you're electing during, your new hire for the rest of the year or for open enrollment during the following year, if you do not use that money, you lose it, you forfeit it. So we have to be careful about how much money we're putting into an FSA, which we'll, talk about a little bit later, how to determine what the right amount might be for you so that you're not forfeiting any money at the end of the year. One thing to note with an FSA is, yes, it is a use it or lose it, but there is a tiny bit of an exception. So they do have a 2.5-month rollover period, which means that $500. So, unfortunately, if say you have $1,000 in your FSA in December and all of a sudden January hits, you didn't use it, only $500 rolls over, not the full $1,000. You will still lose $500. But that $500 will roll over into the next year and you can claim reimbursements on it for 2.5 months until March 15th. So still gives you some time to get some money out of that FSA so you don't lose it. Something else to note here though is that in order for this money to roll over, you have to continue to elect the FSA during open enrollment for the following year. So say you have an FSA right now in 2021, you do not want to elect an FSA in 2022 and you have, $1,000 in December, January 1st hits, you completely lose that money. However, if you have an FSA in 2021 and during open enrollment this year, you elect an FSA for 2022, that $500 will roll over and you can collect reimbursements off of it during that time. I will say in the past, typically that 2.5 months that you had to collect reimbursements were only for medical expenses that you had during the previous year. So say you had an appointment in January, you wouldn't be able to use that money in January. However, with COVID, a lot of different laws and regulations were updated to allow people to have better access to their FSA funds. So I would definitely check in with your HR department to better understand what the rules and regulations are right now as everything continues with COVID and laws are, constantly changing. Another thing to note about an FSA is that you cannot change your election mid-year. So say you're halfway through the year, you used up all your FSA funds and you realize you need more. Unfortunately, once you've used your funds, they're gone. The only way that you can make an update to your FSA, whether it's adding more money or dropping off of the plan, is if you have a qualifying life event. So a qualifying life event would be, as an example, there's a bunch of them, but a couple examples would be having a baby or getting married. So say you get married on April 30th. On April 30th, that is your qualifying life event date, and you have 30 days from that date to notify your HR team that you've had a qualifying life event, and you can either add or drop off of the plan. Otherwise, if you enroll in an FSA during open enrollment, you are stuck in that plan for the duration of the year, and those payments will come out of your paycheck every single pay period, no matter what. Within that same breath though, I do want to say the interesting thing about an FSA as compared to an HSA is that an FSA, if you elect it, say during open enrollment, so 2021 open enrollment, you elected October, November, and then the new plan starts on January 1st of 2022, you receive all of your FSA money upfront. So if you elect $1,000, you receive all of your FSA money, all $1,000 on January 1st. On January 2nd, you could spend all $1,000 of that FSA. On January 3rd, if you really wanted to, you could quit your job or you could get another job and you do not have to pay that $1,000 back to the company. So it's just something to note on that end. The other thing could be, you get halfway through 2022 and for some reason you get let go. When you get let go, you also lose those FSA funds. So you have to be really careful about monitoring, when you're spending it throughout the year. And I always say it's best to do some of those things at the beginning of the year so that you are spending that money versus waiting till the end of the year and then trying to fit it all in and, not wanting to lose any or forfeit any of that money. So lastly, the thing that I want to mention about an FSA versus an HSA, and I think I mentioned this previously, is that typically you have to pick one or the other. If you are enrolling in a medical plan that is a PPO or an HMO, you can enroll in an FSA. If you're enrolling in a high-deductible health plan, an HDHP, you can enroll in an HSA. There are a few companies out there that have a very special type of FSA where if you have a high deductible plan, you can enroll in an HSA and an FSA, but that's something you'd have to talk about with your HR department. Typically, the plans are very separate. You cannot have one and the other at the same time. You can only have an HSA or an FSA. Now that we have the basics out of the way, let's talk about how to determine how much money you should contribute to either an FSA or an HSA, or whether or not contributing to one of these plans makes sense for you at all. Something to note as I talk through this is that I'm not a financial planner and these are my personal opinions. It's what, I've typically done and how I've figured out how much money to put into an FSA or an HSA. If you have any complex medical needs or retirement needs, I would recommend reaching out to a professional and or, your HR department to help guide you through some of these decisions. Okay, so I think the best way to go through how to budget for money that you're going to put into an HSA or an FSA is to give you an example of how I do this for myself, because depending on the company I've been at, I have always either had an HSA or an FSA plan. Right now, I personally have an FSA, so I need to do a little bit more thorough budgeting because of their use it or lose it policy. So personally, for me, from a medical perspective, I'll normally get my annual exam, which doesn't typically cost any money because it's preventative care and they want you to get into the doctor to get that preventative care to, stop any future larger medical expenses you can have so they can catch anything that you could potentially have early. So I will do that on an annual basis, $0. The other thing that I make sure to budget for when it comes to a medical standpoint is that I have a prescription on a monthly basis that costs $10. So when I'm figuring out how much to put in my FSA, I will multiply that up by 12, $10 a month, that's $120 a year. Then I will also look at dental. So for an FSA, dental is covered. Also, I believe for an HSA, but you should check with your employer. So when I'm budgeting for dental, I'll look at my plan and see how much an office visit is to get my teeth cleaned. I've typically found for me, it's been around $60. So I will budget for that. And then because I have more cavity-prone teeth, it's the worst. I hate it, but I do. I will put a little extra padding in there in case I have to have, any type of cavity filled and or, another procedure done on my teeth that I may not have expected. I typically budget that around $300, just in case to help me out a little bit on the dental front. So total for dental, I will budget around, $360. And then lastly, vision. So I have contacts. You may or may not be a lucky person with 20/20 vision. I am not. So I have to budget for my contacts and an eye exam on an annual basis because I can only renew my contacts every single year. So similar to dentist appointments, vision appointments are typically around $60. So I will budget for that. You can check your vision plan to see how much that appointment might cost for you. Everyone's plan is a little bit different. And then I also need to budget for contacts, which are really expensive, unfortunately. I get ones that I can wear, every other week. So that costs around $400. Sometimes it can be upwards of $600. So for this example, let's take $400 and say that my contacts will cost $400 for the year. They might even be a little bit more. Sometimes eye doctors will give you rebates, which is really nice, and they'll deduct that off. But I like to go for the full cost just in case, because you never know what's going to happen. Also, if I need glasses in the next year when I am electing my FSA, I'll take that into consideration and put some additional money into my FSA account. I just got glasses, so we're not going to take that into account right now. So for vision then in total, it's around $460. So in total, my expenses would be that $120 plus $360 plus $460, which equals $940. Then for me, because I like to go a little bit on the conservative route, I don't know what's going to happen on an annual basis, but I don't want to put so much more money in that I risk losing the money that I put into my account because I don't have enough medical expenses, is I'll round it up a little bit. So in this case, I'd probably go and I'd put $1,000 in there. If I was anticipating, some additional things that might need to happen, I might put $1,200 into my account, and then this will come out per paycheck on a pre-tax basis, and I will have that $1,200 at the beginning of the year on January 1st. So if I need to spend it on January 2nd, that's something that I can do with this FSA plan. You should go through this process for your specific medical needs. So what I would do is log into your medical site. A lot of times, for example, I have Blue Cross Blue Shield. So if I log into Blue Cross Blue Shield, it'll show me how much I paid for all of my different medical expenses over the past year. And so then I'll look at those and kind of reassess what I did in the past year that I might not do in the future. So I would recommend that you do this specifically for your health needs. You might have different prescriptions that you want to take into account and add those to your FSA. Do the same for dental and vision. You also might want to consider then going through this process if you have dependents too. So if you have children or you have a spouse and you need to better understand their medical needs too, you could go through the same process for them and then add that money to what you might need for medical expenses and put it into an FSA. There is an IRS maximum for, employee only, and then there's a little bit higher one if you have dependents as well. But, until you're far above and you're hitting that maximum when you're adding up everyone's medical expenses, and I would do it as an itemized list. On the other hand, we talked a lot about FSAs, but how does this impact an HSA? So you can do a very similar thing with your HSA to figure out how much money you want to put into your HSA on an annual basis. The interesting thing about an HSA though is that you can update your HSA funds, so what you're contributing to your HSA, typically on a monthly basis, sometimes per paycheck, depends on your company. And so what this means is also that your HSA funds are funded on a per paycheck basis. So if you have a bigger medical expense coming up, say in March, if you have a bigger medical expense in March, you might want to make your contributions to your HSA much higher in January and February so that you then have all of that money in your account by March so that you can then pay yourself back with those funds. The other benefit then again of an HSA is that you don't have to be as conservative when you're planning how much money you want to put into that account. I mean, once you put it is in there specifically just for medical expenses and you can't just take it out. However, that money isn't a use it or lose it situation. Once that money is in there, it is your money forever. You get to take it with you when you leave the company and it is yours to keep. So if you accidentally say over contribute, put a little bit too much money in, at some point you'll probably use those funds. If not, you can keep them until you're in retirement age and you can withdraw them and use them, whichever way that you see fit. I hope that going through and kind of giving you an example of how I do this for myself was able to help you figure out how you could go through this process and do it for yourself. Again, look at your medical expenses, your dental, your vision expenses, itemize them out, what you paid in the last year, and then what you think that your expenses will be in the future. Add these all together, add a little bit of cushion, and enroll in that for your FSA or HSA. Thank you so much for making it all the way through my video. If you liked this content, make sure to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe so that I know to make more videos like this. Thank you so much again, and have a great day. Bye.